Your seat was wasted on you. She belongs here, not you.
Then keep smiling. Now the whole stadium gets to see who you really are.
Hook dialogue. 300 million people are watching your husband right now, and none of them know that's your seat. Pre-story summary. Nadia Hunt built the deal that put her husband's company on the world stage. She secured the VIP seats at the World Cup final as a tribute to her late father, a man who crossed an ocean with nothing and spent his whole life dreaming of that one moment. Reed told her the trip was canceled. She stayed home. Then the stadium's big screen showed the world exactly where her husband was and who was sitting beside him in her seat. What Reed and Sienna Cross never thought to check was what Nadia had written into the fine print of the contract she drafted herself 9 months before she knew she would need it. Chapter 1. The whole world saw it before she did. The match had been going for 20 minutes when Dana called. Nadia was on the couch with a glass of red wine she had barely touched. The television loud enough to fill the apartment, but not quite loud enough to feel like company. The World Cup final was being played in Los Angeles this year, the biggest game on the planet, and she was watching it alone in her living room on Park Avenue, while her husband was supposedly stuck in a scheduling conflict that had appeared late yesterday afternoon. He had explained it over the phone in that smooth, reasonable voice she had stopped fully trusting about 8 months ago. She had told herself she had made her peace with it. She had ordered Thai food that arrived lukewarm. She had changed into the old green sweatshirt she wore when she had no one to perform for. She had poured the wine and sat down and tried to just watch the game the way her father used to watch it, leaning forward with both elbows on his knees, calling every play under his breath as though the coaches on the field could actually hear him. George Ashby had come to America from Trinidad when he was 9 years old. His family arrived in Queens with 2 suitcases and a cardboard box of her grandmother's cast iron pots, and they rebuilt their lives the way immigrant families do, quietly and without complaint, because there was no audience for the complaint, and it would not have paid the electric bill. George finished his degree at night school while working days, built a small commercial insurance business in a neighborhood that had not been easy on newcomers, raised his daughter and his son with steadiness and real care, and created a life that was by any honest measure a solid and meaningful thing. But the one image he held onto through all of it, through 40 years of American winters and American paperwork and American patience, was the World Cup final. He had never been to one. He talked about it the way people talk about things they have been carrying a long time without setting down. Not bitterly. Never with bitterness. Just as a fact about his life that he fully intended to change someday. Every 4 years without fail, he watched every match from the same armchair in the living room in Queens, his coffee going cold on the table beside him because he forgot to drink it when things got interesting on the field. And every 4 years he said the same thing to whoever was in the room, sometimes to no one at all. One day I am going to be right there in that stadium. One day I am going to see it in person. He died on a Tuesday in March, 2 years ago, a heart attack, fast and complete. The way it sometimes takes men who have been quietly managing chest pains for 6 months without mentioning it to anyone, because mentioning it would have meant stopping, and stopping was not something George Ashby knew how to do. Nadia flew home the next morning and stood at the back of the church because she could not make herself go to the front, and she thought about all the stadiums he would never sit in and held that thought the way you hold something sharp because at least you can feel it clearly. She had gotten the VIP seat 8 months later. It was not luck, and it was not someone's generosity. It was the result of 8 months of her own work, using relationships she had built over a decade in sports marketing before she married Reed Hunt and gradually stopped being known by her own name in rooms that used to know it very well. Reed's company, Hunt Global, was positioned to become a premier North American sponsor of the tournament. The strategy was hers. The presentation was hers. 3 rounds of negotiations with FIFA's partnership committee, months of careful relationship cultivation, a pitch document she rewrote 11 times before it felt right. All of it was hers. When the deal closed, she stepped back the way she had gotten into the habit of stepping back, and Reed accepted the congratulations of 20 board members who looked at him like he had done something visionary. He had signed the contract. She had written it. One of the things she had written into it, quietly and specifically, was a pair of VIP seats at the World Cup final, right there in the hospitality benefits section, in language she had drafted herself, her name attached to them as co-architect of partnership. It seemed like the right way to mark what she had done, a small, private way of keeping something for herself in an arrangement where she had given almost everything else away. The day the deal closed, she called Reed and told him about the seats. She cried a little on the phone, which she almost never did, and she told him what they meant. That this was for her father, that she was going to sit in that stadium with 60,000 people around her and think about George Ashby and the cast iron pots and the armchair in Queens. And it was going to feel like keeping a promise she had made at the back of a church on a Tuesday in March. Reed said George would be proud of her. 3 weeks ago, he told her the trip had to be canceled. A conflict with the Tokyo investors, something critical that could not be moved. He was sorry. He knew what the seats meant. He would make it up to her in whatever way she wanted. She had believed him. That was the thing she kept returning to, sitting on the couch in the green sweatshirt with the wine going warm. She had believed him, not because the explanation held up to hard examination, not because she trusted him the way she once had, but because sometimes you accept something, not because it is true, but because the truth you suspect is an enormous amount of work, and you have already been carrying so much for so long. Her phone lit up on the cushion beside her. Dana, she answered with half her attention still on the screen. Are you watching? Dana said. Her voice had a quality Nadia recognized immediately. Dana Hayes was not a careful person by nature. She was direct and quick and had been that way since they met at Columbia 22 years ago. When Dana got careful, it meant something was wrong enough to require it. I'm watching. The big screen. Look at the big screen right now. What happened next happened the way things happen in stadiums, all at once and very large and without any warning. The broadcast cut to the VIP section. The stadium's big screen picked it up a second later. For 5 seconds, the camera held on 2 people in the front row of the corporate hospitality suite. A man leaning close to a woman, the woman's hand on his arm with the ease of a hand that has been there before. Both of them angled toward each other, the way people angle when they are not really there for the game. The man was Reed. The woman was Sienna Cross. Nadia knew who she was before she could fully register what she was seeing. She recognized Sienna the way you recognize someone you have looked at closely for years. The dark hair, the particular tilt of her chin, the smile she had watched Sienna develop and refine across 4 years in rooms that Nadia had personally opened for her. Sienna, who Nadia had hired as an associate when she was 26 and hungry in the raw, unformed way of someone with real talent, but not yet the judgment to go with it, who Nadia had taught to read a room, to build trust across a negotiation table, to structure a pitch so it moved people, who Nadia had fought for in 2 separate budget meetings when Reed's team wanted to cut her from the World Cup project for being too junior. Sienna, sitting in her seat, in the suite that 8 months of Nadia's work had secured, in the stadium where Nadia had planned to sit and feel close to her father for the first time since the back of that church. The broadcast cut away to a replay. The camera moved on as cameras do, indifferent to what it had just shown 300 million people. Dana was still on the line saying her name. "I see it," Nadia said. She set the phone face down on the cushion and sat still for a moment, with the television still running and the city outside going about its Friday night exactly as planned. Then she opened her laptop. The clip had been posted from inside the stadium before the broadcast even cut away. Someone in the lower concourse level had caught the big screen on their phone and uploaded it in under 90 seconds. By the time Nadia found it, the original post had 40,000 shares, and the number was moving upward every time she refreshed. 42,000. 47. She watched it climb the way you watch something you cannot stop. The clip was on 4 separate platforms within 3 minutes. Each version had its own comment thread, and she read them the way you read things you know will hurt you and cannot make yourself stop reading. Someone had circled the empty seat beside Reed and Sienna in red. That image, the two of them together with the vacant chair to Sienna's right, was being shared separately from the clip itself and moving faster. The empty seat had become its own thing, its own story, its own fury. A sports business account with a large following had written, "That is the co-architect hospitality suite at the FIFA North America final. Those seats are not random VIP. They are contractually designated for the person who built the deal. I have been in that suite. I know exactly what it takes to earn a place in it." Someone else in the industry had replied, "I was in the room when the Hunt Global pitch was presented to the FIFA committee. The person who built that pitch is not in that seat tonight." Nadia read those comments twice and kept going. She found one that stopped her entirely. A woman who identified herself as a sports sponsorship attorney had written in a thread that already had 11,000 replies. "I don't know whose seat that is, but I know what those seats mean in the partnership architecture. The co-architect designation is not honorary. It belongs to the person who did the foundational work. Whoever she is, she earned those chairs. She worked incredibly hard for them. And tonight she is sitting at home, watching someone else use what she built. I am furious on her behalf, and I don't even know her name." Nadia read that comment 3 times. The woman was close. She was very close. She understood the architecture, the designation, the weight of what it meant to have your name in that section of a FIFA contract. What she did not know, what she could not possibly know, from a 12-second clip of a stadium big screen, was that the seat had not been built for the work alone. It had been built for a man who sat in an armchair in Queens and forgot to drink his coffee when the game got interesting. It had been built for 40 years of one day, "I am going to be right there," repeated quietly into a living room where no one was listening except the daughter on the floor, doing her homework, who heard every word. It had been built for a Tuesday in March, and a church Nadia could not walk to the front of, and for a promise she made to herself in the parking lot afterward that she was going to find a way to keep the thing he had never gotten to have. The stranger on the internet was furious on behalf of the work. Nadia sat in her living room and felt the full weight of everything the stranger did not know, and that weight was the heaviest thing she had carried since the morning she flew home for the funeral, and she carried it the way her father had always carried things, without complaint and without an audience, until she was ready to set it down and do something about it. She closed the laptop, not because she could not stand it, because she had seen enough to understand that the ground had shifted, and what happened next was not going to happen on the internet. It was going to happen in a boardroom and a law office and her own kitchen where the cast iron pot was on its hook, and everything important she had built was now in motion toward everything important that had been taken from her. She picked the phone back up. Dana was still there. "I'm here," she said. "Come over. Right now. Not tonight." She stood and walked to the window, one hand flat against the glass. "It's already everywhere." Someone circled the empty seat. They're sharing that separately from the clip. Industry people are commenting. They know what that suite is. "I know," Dana said quietly. "I've been watching it." "Nadia, people who know how that deal was built are saying it publicly." She thought about her father, the coffee going cold, the armchair. She thought about the cast iron pots she used every Sunday because they were the most present and specific thing she had left of him. She moved to the bedroom and opened the bottom drawer of the dresser and lifted out a gray folder she had placed there 3 weeks ago, the morning after she signed paperwork she had not told anyone about. She had put it in the drawer and told herself she would know the right moment. She dialed Julian Park. He answered before the second ring. "I saw the broadcast," he said, without any other greeting. "Are the documents secure?" "Everything is on the off-site server. Moved it 3 weeks ago, the day you told me to. The original pitch documents, all 11 contract drafts with your revisions tracked, the full FIFA correspondence from your account, the negotiation notes with timestamps showing you as primary contact through every session. All of it is there and it is not going anywhere." A brief pause. "Are you all right?" "Not yet," she said, "but I know what I'm doing." She ended the call and sat on the edge of the bed with the gray folder in her lap. The folder held 2 documents. The first was her employment contract with Meridian Sports Group, signed 3 weeks ago, designating her senior partner of corporate strategy, effective immediately. She had not told anyone. The second was a copy of Clause 14, Section C of the Hunt Global World Cup Partnership Agreement. She had written that clause herself with the care of someone building a foundation that would need to hold weight later. She knew every word of it. She closed the folder and put it back in the drawer. She poured the wine down the drain, rinsed the glass, and stood at the sink with the water running for a moment. Then she dried her hands on the dish towel her mother had embroidered with a small yellow bird and walked back to the living room. She turned off the television. The apartment went quiet in the way apartments go quiet late at night, not empty but settled, full of the small sounds of a city that has no particular awareness of what any one person inside it is carrying. She texted Dana, "Not tonight. Come at 9 tomorrow morning. Bring coffee from the place on Columbus, the good dark roast. I will explain everything then." Then she sat down and waited for her husband to come home. She was not afraid. She had been afraid months ago when she first understood what was happening and what an honest response would require of her. She had gone through the fear the way you go through something unavoidable, straight to the center of it, and come out the other side into something that felt less like bravery and more like clarity. Her father used to say, when things went wrong, and he was not a man who said much about trouble, because he believed what you did about a problem mattered more than what you said. But when he did speak, it was short and true. You cannot get back to where you started, but you can get to somewhere better. Start walking. The clock said 11:47. Somewhere below, someone laughed, short and bright and entirely unaware, the most ordinary sound in the world. Nadia sat with her hands quiet in her lap and let the night move around her. She was ready. Chapter 2. He came home with roses and a prepared story. He came home at 2:17 in the morning with a dozen white roses. She heard the elevator first, then his key in the lock, then the specific sound of a man composing himself in a doorway he is not sure how to enter. She had been listening to that sound, in one form or another, for 5 years. Reed came through the door and stopped, when he saw her sitting in the living room with the lights at half and the television off and a cup of tea she had made an hour ago that had gone cold. He was holding the roses in the way of a man who believes the act of carrying them communicates something important. He was in the clothes she had last seen him in when he left for what he had called Chicago. His jacket was open. His hair had the look of someone who had been on a long flight and had done something about it somewhere around the second hour. He crossed the room and set the roses on the coffee table between them with the care of someone placing something fragile. She looked at them for a moment. 12 white roses wrapped in cellophane with a small bow that had gone sideways in transit. Airport flowers. She could tell by the specific way they were wrapped, the generic bow, the particular plastic smell of a florist stand between a gate and a taxi line. He had carried those flowers through an airport and into their apartment, and he believed this gesture was going to be useful. That told her more than anything he was about to say. Not the roses themselves, the thinking behind them. The assumption that an object placed between two people could do the work an honest conversation would otherwise have to do. He sat down in the chair across from her, not beside her, and she noted the distance. He was managing the room. He used the prepared angle. It had gotten out of hand. He was not going to insult her by pretending the optics were anything other than terrible. Sienna had been under significant pressure with the post-closing integration work. The seats had come up in a moment of poor judgment he deeply regretted. It was over, completely and permanently over. He needed her to understand that what she had seen on that screen was not what their marriage was. He was asking her to give him the chance to prove that. She let him finish. She did not cry, which was what he had prepared himself for. She did not raise her voice. She sat with the cold tea and the sideways bow and let him get to the end of it. When the room went quiet, she said, "How long?" He opened his mouth. "Not the prepared answer," she said, "the true one." A pause that lasted several seconds too long. "Since February," he said. It came out differently than his other words had, without the texture of something rehearsed. She sat with that. February. 7 months. Not a moment of poor judgment. 7 months of daily deliberate choices while she was making calls to people in Zurich and rewriting pitch documents and building the thing that currently had his name on it. "I have a question," she said, "about the Tanaka pitch. In February." He went very still. "Did you use the story about my father?" she said, "the immigrant family, the World Cup dream, as a closing element?" The kitchen clock was the only sound in the room for several seconds. "I thought it was a true story," he said slowly. "I thought if it moved me, it would move the room. I did not think of it as something that belonged to you specifically. I thought of it as ours." She looked at him. "You used the story about the seat he never got to sit in," she said, "to close a business deal. And then you took the seat and gave it to her." He did not look away. She gave him credit for that. He held what she had just said with something that looked like genuine understanding arriving somewhere it had not been before. But understanding arriving too late is its own kind of thing, and she was done waiting in the gap between where he was and where he needed to have been. "I need you to go," she said. "Today. Take what you need for a few weeks. We will talk through attorneys." He looked at her with the face of a man who has started to understand the edge of something large. "Nadia, whatever you are considering, I am asking you to wait." "I know what I am doing," she said. "I have known for a while. That is the part you have not caught up to yet." He left an hour later with a bag he had packed himself. She heard the front door close, and then the elevator, and then the building settling back into the quiet of a space that has been cleared of something that was taking up too much room. Dana arrived at 9:05 with the good dark roast from Columbus and the expression of a woman who had been up since before 6. She had the specific look of someone who slept in yesterday's clothes and did not mind. They went straight to the kitchen. Dana set the cups on the table, took off her coat, and looked at Nadia with the direct measuring look that was one of the things Nadia had valued most in 22 years of friendship. She did not round corners. "How are you?" she said. "A request for the real thing." "Clear," Nadia said. "I know what I am doing." Dana studied her. "Reed is gone?" "Left an hour ago." "Good." Dana picked up her coffee and held it in both hands. "I want to tell you something I found last night. Nadia, she came into that company because of you. You wrote her into the World Cup project budget when the initial proposal cut her out. You put your own name on her first-year performance review when no one else would touch it. Every door she walked through, you opened." "I know who she is," Nadia said. "I know you do. I'm saying it because I want you to let yourself feel the full size of that specific part. Not just the affair, not just the seat, the fact that you opened every door for her and she used what she found behind every single one to walk into your marriage and into your father's seat." Dana leaned forward. "You are allowed to be furious about that separately from everything else." "I have been furious," Nadia said. "For 8 months. It has just been a very quiet kind of furious." Dana held her gaze. Then she nodded the way she nodded when she had received something real. Nadia opened the gray folder on the kitchen table and laid both documents out side by side. The Meridian Sports Group employment contract, signed 3 weeks ago. The copy of Clause 14, Section C from the Hunt Global World Cup Agreement. Dana read them once in silence, then again. Then she sat back and looked at Nadia with an expression that moved through surprise and landed somewhere slower and more serious. "When did you sign this?" she said, touching the Meridian contract. 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks before the match. 3 weeks before the match." A pause, and he never read the clause. "He signed what I put in front of him," Nadia said. "He always did. He trusted me with the details." Dana looked at both documents for a long moment. Then she looked up with the specific expression of someone who has watched a person they love over many years and is only now seeing the full shape of what that person has been quietly building inside themselves through hard seasons. "Your father," Dana said finally, "would have absolutely lost his mind." She said it the way you say something that is both true and good, sad and proud in the same breath. Nadia almost smiled. "He would have called everyone he knew," she said. "He would have made a whole production of it." She looked at the 2 documents on the table. "He also would have told me to stop talking about it and get to work." She picked up her phone and called Gretchen Cole. Chapter 3. What she built and what they took without counting the cost. On the 4th morning after Reed left, a column appeared in a financial entertainment publication that called itself a media company and functioned primarily as a platform for whoever fed it something convenient. Sources close to Reed Hunt say, "Estranged wife's claims rooted in personal instability." 3 paragraphs of sourced from people familiar with the matter, building a portrait of a woman who had been struggling. The pregnancy that ended badly 2 years ago, private information that exactly 12 people in the world knew, was now sitting in a paragraph about her state of mind. Her involvement in the World Cup deal had been overstated, the piece suggested. Her claims of contribution were the product of someone who had always stood near important things and confused proximity with authorship. Nadia read it twice, slowly, and then closed the laptop and went to the window. This was Sienna, obviously. And behind Sienna was Reed, who had told her about the pregnancy in a real moment of closeness 3 years ago. The specific way you tell someone something when you believe they are completely safe. He had handed that across whatever table he and Sienna shared, and she had filed it away carefully, the way someone files a resource they intend to use. Nadia was not surprised, but There is a difference between knowing something in the abstract and seeing it in print with a headline above it. And she allowed herself to sit with that difference for a full 10 minutes before she did anything else. Then she called her mother. Margaret Ashby answered on the second ring, which was how she always answered Nadia's calls. "I have been seeing things on the news," Margaret said. "Dana called 2 days ago and explained some of it. I assume what she left out was yours to tell." "It was," Nadia said. "I will tell you now." She told her everything, not just the seat and the big screen and the airport roses, the full 8 months, the quiet accumulation, the decision in January, the conversations with Julian, the Meridian contract, the clause she had written into the Hunt Global Agreement before she knew she would need it. All of it, in order, the way her father had taught her to tell things. Start with what you know, say it plainly, let the facts do the work. Her mother was quiet through most of it. When Nadia finished, Margaret said, "Your father built every contract he ever wrote so that it protected him if the other side behaved badly. He used to say the best time to write the emergency clause is before you know you need one. I learned it from him," Nadia said. "Come for dinner Thursday before the board meeting Friday," Margaret said. "I will make something with the pot." "I will be there," Nadia said. That afternoon, Julian Park called on a number she did not recognize. He explained without preamble that his work phone had been submitted for decommissioning. Sienna was terminating his position. A severance package was waiting, contingent on signing a non-disclosure agreement broad enough to cover every project he had been part of during his employment. They wanted it signed by end of week. "Do not sign anything," Nadia said. "Tell them you need time for attorney review." "Already said that." "Good. That gives us what we need. Now I want to hear everything. Your words." He talked for a long time. He was precise the way he was always precise, with dates and room numbers and names and the exact sequence of things. He had been in every room, present for the first conversation between Nadia and the FIFA North America Committee, a Wednesday morning in June that went 3 hours and produced the clearest strategic outline of a corporate partnership opportunity he had witnessed in 30 years. He had watched her rebuild the pitch document 11 times. He had been on the conference line in March when the exclusivity negotiations almost fell apart, and Nadia had spent 4 days working through language with 2 lawyers and a FIFA regional director until she found the framing that gave everyone enough without breaking the structure she had designed. He described the board presentation. Sienna had prepared the slide deck as a junior project team member. Nadia had reviewed and substantially revised it twice. The actual content, the strategy, the positioning, the financial projections, the entire relationship history with FIFA, all of it had come from Nadia. But Nadia had not been in the room for the final presentation. She had been at her mother's that week, dealing with a matter related to her father's estate. She had trusted the team to present what she had built. Sienna had presented it alone, in the first person throughout. Not we, not the team. I developed, I identified, I negotiated. I sat there and watched the board look at her the way you look at someone who has just handed you something extraordinary, Julian said, and I did not say anything. He stopped. "I have thought about that moment many times. You were in the wrong room at the wrong moment with nothing in your hands," Nadia said. "That was not cowardice. That was the wrong conditions. There is a project retrospective I wrote in October," he said, 8 weeks after the deal closed. 51 pages. I write them for every major project, for my own records, while things are still recent. This one documents the full timeline, the key decisions, and what I personally observed at each stage. I filed it because the way the deal had been presented internally was bothering me, and I wanted an accurate record while I still had it clearly. "Send it tonight," she said. to the secure address. And Julian, thank you for all of it. I was in every single room, he said. Everyone. That is what counts. That Thursday, her mother came for dinner. They cooked together with the cast iron pot on the stove and the radio on low and the comfortable rhythm of two people who have been sharing a kitchen for 40 years. Margaret had brought okra and salted fish from the Caribbean grocery on Junction Boulevard, the same one Nadia's grandmother had used, and the smell of it in the apartment was the smell of the Queen's kitchen and of every Sunday that had ever happened inside it. They did not talk about Reed during the cooking. It was only when they sat down and the food was in front of them that her mother looked at her directly and said, "Show me the documents again, the ones you showed Dana." Nadia got the gray folder. She laid both documents on the table beside the dinner plates, and her mother read them with her reading glasses on and her full attention applied, the way she had read every piece of paper that mattered in their family's life. When she finished, she took off her glasses. She did not speak for a long time, not reading, just sitting with what she had read and what she was thinking. Then she said something that was not about the contract or the clause or the legal mechanism. She said it the way she said things that had been sitting inside her for a while and had finally found the right moment to come out. "He sat at my table," Margaret said, 3 years ago at Christmas. "He sat at my table and ate the food I cooked and listened to your father tell the story about coming over from Trinidad. George told it the way he always told it, with the details about the pots and the 2 suitcases, and the cousin in Queens who let them sleep on his floor. And Reed sat there, and he laughed in the right places, and he said the right things, and I thought, this is a man who understands where my daughter comes from." She stopped. Her hands were flat on the table beside the documents. "He was not listening because he cared," she said. "He was listening because he was collecting something useful. I did not see that at the time. I see it now." She looked at the copy of the contract, the fact that he sat at my table and then used your father's story in a business meeting to make himself money. That is the specific thing I will not forgive, not the affair. That. The kitchen was very quiet. Nadia looked at her mother and felt the full weight of what she had just said, which was not a legal statement and not a strategic one, but simply the truth of what a mother understands about a man who was never as safe as he appeared at her table. "I know," Nadia said. Her mother picked up her fork. "Eat," she said. "Then we talk about Friday." They ate in the comfortable silence of 2 women who have been feeding each other through hard things for a long time, and then they cleared the table together, and it was during the clearing up, her mother washing and Nadia drying the cast iron pot the way you dry cast iron, carefully and completely before it can rust, that her phone rang with a number she did not recognize. She answered it. Nadia Hunt. The voice was unhurried, a man, older, with the kind of tone that has been in a lot of rooms and learned to take up exactly the space it needs and no more. "This is Marco Reyes, senior partner at Meridian. I wanted to call before Friday to make sure you had everything you needed from our side." She had spoken to Marco Reyes twice before signing the Meridian contract. He had been introduced through a mutual contact at FIFA's North American Committee, someone who had been on the other side of the World Cup negotiations and who knew, from the inside, who had actually driven that partnership. In their first conversation, Marco had said he had been following the Hunt Global deal with particular interest because he recognized the quality of the work and wanted to understand who was actually doing it. In their second conversation, he had been direct. "I know what a well-built deal looks like from the outside. Someone built that partnership with care and intelligence, and it was not the person standing in front of the board when the deal closed. I think you should be doing this work with your name on it." She had signed the Meridian contract 11 days after that call. Now she stood in her mother's kitchen with a cast iron pot in her hands and said, "Everything is ready." Julian Park's retrospective arrived last night. 51 pages, timestamped through the full build, a brief pause on the line. That document changes Friday considerably. Then, without any transition, in a different register entirely. I should tell you something. I grew up in Caracas. My father came to New York in 1987 with $300 and the address of a cousin in the Bronx. He spent 20 years building a small freight business that nobody outside the Bronx ever heard of. He died never having been to a World Cup final either, even though he talked about it his whole life. A pause. I read about your father in the background materials before we first spoke. I wanted you to know I understood what the seat meant, not as a fact, as a thing I recognized from my own kitchen. She stood in her mother's kitchen with the cast iron pot still in her hands and let that land the way it deserved to land. "Thank you," she said, "for saying that. I will see you Friday morning," he said. She hung up and put the pot back on its hook. Her mother looked at her. "Who was that?" "Someone who knew what I built," Nadia said, before I had to explain it to him, and who understood why it mattered. Her mother considered that for a moment. Then she nodded once, the way Di nodded when she received something that needed no further comment. They finished the kitchen together, and Nadia drove her mother home, and on the way back she stopped at a light with the window cracked and the October air coming in cold and clean, and she thought about her father saying, "Start walking," and she thought, "I have been walking. Tomorrow I arrive." Chapter 4. She was not supposed to be in that room. She woke at 5:30 on Friday morning without an alarm. She lay still in the gray provisional light for a few minutes. Then she got up and made coffee the way her father made it, too strong, in the old percolator she had inherited along with the cast iron pots, and she stood at the counter while it brewed and looked out at the street below where nothing was moving yet. She had laid out what she was wearing the night before. A charcoal dress, simple cut, good fabric. Her grandmother's watch, which she wore on days when she needed to feel she was carrying something unbreakable. She had ironed the dress herself, not because it needed it, but because the small, deliberate act steadied her hands. Gretchen Cole was meeting her in the Hunt Global lobby at 8:40. The board session was scheduled for 9. She was out the door by 8:15 with the gray folder in a bag that also held Julian's 51-page retrospective, the original FIFA correspondence printed and tabbed, and a bound copy of the full Hunt Global World Cup Partnership Agreement with Clause 14. Section C marked with a single paper clip, no highlighting. Her father had always said that the person who needs to underline things for other people is not confident their case can stand on its own. Gretchen was already in the lobby when she arrived. Compact, precise, gray hair cut close, the complete calm of someone who has been delivering consequential things in difficult rooms for 30 years. They did not speak much in the elevator. The 34th floor reception desk was staffed by Carla, who had been at Hunt Global for 9 years. She looked up when they stepped off the elevator and went through the sequence of recognizing Nadia, registering Gretchen, registering the folder, and arriving at an expression that was professionally neutral and personally uncertain. "Mrs. Hunt, I do not have you on the schedule this morning." "No," Nadia said, "you would not. Gretchen Cole is with me. She submitted our standing request to the Administrative Council yesterday under the Partnership Agreement's co-architect provision. He should have it on file." Carla spoke quietly into the receiver. A longer pause. Then she set it down. "Room 2, she said. "They are asking you to wait while they conclude the current agenda item. We will wait in room 2. "Thank you, Carla." Room 2 was the small conference room off the main corridor with a glass wall looking onto the hallway. They sat, A junior associate brought water. Through the glass, Nadia could see the closed boardroom doors 15 feet away. She sat with her hands in her lap and waited. Gretchen said, "Lo, they will try to limit your time to a statement. Our position is that the partnership agreement gives you floor rights on any matter directly relating to its terms. I know our position. I am restating it because in the next 15 minutes someone is going to tell you something different in an authoritative voice, and I want your foundation solid." "It is solid." Gretchen looked at her for a moment. "Yes," she said, "I can see that." They waited 18 minutes. Then Ferris, Hunt Global's administrative counsel, appeared and opened the door. He looked at both of them. "The board is prepared to hear a brief statement. 10 minutes. We will need whatever time the material requires," Gretchen said pleasantly. He stepped back from the door. They walked down the hall. The boardroom was exactly as she had always known it. The long mahogany table, the Manhattan skyline behind the north windows, the Hunt Global logo in brushed steel on the wall, put up 4 years ago during the rebranding that the World Cup sponsorship had made possible. 12 people at the table. Reed at the far end in his chair, in a dark suit, with the expression of a man who has been caught and has not yet finished deciding what that means for him. Sienna to his left, in the charcoal blazer she had worn in the press video 2 days ago, with the composed professional bearing she had spent 4 years developing in rooms that Nadia had opened for her. When Nadia came through the door, Sienna's eyes went to her and went still in a way that was almost imperceptible. Almost. Theodore Birch, board chair, looked at Nadia over his reading glasses. "Mrs. Hunt, thank you for the time," she said. She set her bag on the table at the near end and did not sit. "Before I open this folder," she said, "I want to say one thing that is not in any of these documents." The room was quiet. She looked at the board members along the table, not at Reed and not at Sienna. "My father came to America from Trinidad at 9 years old," she said. "He spent 40 years planning to attend a World Cup final. He died before he made it. I built this partnership in his memory. I want this board to know that before I show you what comes next, because what I am about to present is not about a marriage falling apart. It is about what was actually built here and who built it, and those are questions that belong to this board regardless of anything else." Then she opened the folder. She placed the first document at the center of the table, the executed Hunt Global World Cup Partnership Agreement, open to the page showing the co-architect of partnership designation beside her name. She did not explain it. She let them read. She placed the second document beside the first, her Meridian Sports Group employment contract. The signature page, her name, the effective date, 3 weeks before the breach event. She watched Theodore Birch pick it up and read it once, and then read it again. She watched the board member to his left lean over. She watched the Hunt Global Council reach forward for his copy from Gretchen, who had moved to distribute the prepared packet. Gretchen placed the third document. Clause 14, Section C. She read it aloud, because she had learned in 30 years of practice that contract language lands differently when heard than when read silently. Personal conduct obligations. Documented public behavior materially damaging to brand integrity. Transfer provisions for co-architect designee to any qualified organization, employing the co-architect at the time of breach determination. Birch set down his page. He looked at the Meridian employment contract. He looked at Nadia. "You were employed by Meridian at the time of the breach," he said, 3 weeks prior to the breach event. The breach occurred publicly and was documented globally. The timeline is not in question. Elaine Voss, the board member, whose reputation was for reading every document she was given with full attention, said, "The projected impact on the World Cup partnership value if the transfer provision is invoked." The Hunt Global Council answered quietly. The number he named landed in the room the way large numbers land, not with sound, but with a particular weight of silence that settles over people when they understand the full cost of something at once. Nadia had known the number. She had built what it was attached to. She placed the fourth document, Julian's retrospective, 51 pages, tabbed at 3 key sections. She said only that it represented a contemporaneous account of the World Cup partnership build from inception through closing, written by a senior project team member, 8 weeks after the deal closed, timestamped throughout, available to the board in full. Birch picked it up. The room was quiet for nearly 2 minutes while people read. Then Birch called a recess. Standard procedure, the board needed to consult with counsel. 30 minutes. Nadia and Gretchen were asked to wait in room 2. They went back down the hall. The junior associate brought coffee. Nadia drank half a cup at the glass wall, watching the corridor outside. The purposeful movement of people who have been handed information they were not holding before. She was on her second cup when Gretchen's phone buzzed. Gretchen read the screen, and her expression sharpened. Hunt Global's external counsels has filed an emergency procedural challenge. They are arguing the co-architect designation was a courtesy title with no operational meaning, inserted by a company officer without board authorization after the legal team's review. Nadia was very still. If it holds, Gretchen continued, the transfer provision may not be enforceable. She sat with it for a moment. Then she reached into the bag and opened a document on her phone she had not needed until now. Version 9 of the contract draft, she said. Time-stamped March 14th, 8 days before the legal team's final review, which occurred March 22nd. The co-architect language is present in full in version 9. She handed the phone to Gretchen. The insertion argument does not hold. The language was in the document before they reviewed it. Either they saw it and approved it, or they missed it. Either way, it was not inserted after the fact. Gretchen read it carefully. I need Julian Park to confirm that version 9 is among the preserved documents. Call him now. Gretchen called. Nadia turned to the window. Standing in the lobby corridor below, just visible through the glass, was Marco Reyes. He had arrived because Meridian's legal team had standing in the transfer proceeding. He was there because he said he would be there. He was not looking at his phone or his watch. He was just present in the way of someone who is there for exactly the reason he said he was there. When he caught her eye through the glass, he did not wave or nod. He just looked at her the way you look at someone you are quietly and genuinely glad to see in a difficult room, with no performance attached to it. She turned back to the table. Gretchen lowered the phone. Version 9 is in the preserved files. Timestamped March 14th, 8 days before the legal team's review. The co-architect language is present in full, exactly as it appears in the executed agreement. She picked up her bag. Let's go back in, she said. The boardroom reconvened, and what followed was precise and took 25 minutes. The insertion argument was formally withdrawn. The co-architect designation was confirmed as carrying operational meaning. The breach event was acknowledged. The transfer provision under Clause 14, Section C was recognized as operative. Then Theodore Birch did what procedure required him to do, and what Nadia had known he would have to do, and what she had been thinking about since the night she wrote that clause into the contract at midnight, because some part of her had understood, even then, that she was building something that would need to hold real weight one day. He read the formal breach determination into the permanent company record. He read it in the measured cadence he used for formal statements, not loudly, not with any particular emphasis, simply clearly and completely, because the record required it to be clear and complete. The board hereby formally determines that a breach of Clause 14, Section C of the Hunt Global World Cup North American Partnership Agreement occurred on the date of the FIFA final, when Reed Alexander Hunt, Chief Executive Officer, was publicly documented in the designated co-architect hospitality suite at a FIFA-sanctioned event in conduct constituting behavior materially damaging to the partnership's public integrity. This determination is made on the basis of global media documentation reaching an estimated 300 million viewers and is hereby entered into the company's permanent regulatory filings. Birch read it without looking up. The room was completely silent, 12 people around a mahogany table, and every single one of them understood what it meant to have those words read aloud into the permanent record of a company. Reed Alexander Hunt, Chief Executive Officer. His full name, the specific act, the audience count, the suite his wife had secured. All of it now in the filing, permanently, inseparable from the company's official history, in a document that could be retrieved by anyone with cause to look at it for as long as the company existed. Reed sat at the far end of the table, with his hands flat on the surface and his eyes on a point in the middle distance that contained nothing. He did not look at Nadia. He did not look at Birch. He sat with the specific stillness of a man who has just heard something he cannot unhear and cannot cause to be unfiled, ever, and who is understanding for the first time the full and permanent weight of what he chose to do on a Friday night in October in Los Angeles. No one in the room looked at him except Nadia. She looked at him once, clearly and without heat, the way you look at something you have studied from every angle and have no surprises left to find. And then she looked away, because she had already moved past this room and he had not, and that was not her responsibility anymore. Birch finished. He set down the paper. The transfer, he said, without any particular emphasis, is effective as of that date. Nadia gathered her documents in the order she had placed them and put them back in the bag. She thanked Birch by name. She thanked Voss. She thanked the room. Then she walked out. Marco was in the lobby. He had been there through all of it. When she came through the boardroom doors and walked down the corridor toward him, he looked at her the way he had looked at her through the glass of room 2. Direct and real and without any performance in it. "How did it go?" he said. "It went," she said, which was not the most eloquent thing she had ever said, but it was accurate, and she was tired of saying things that were more than accurate. He gave her the kind of nod that means "I know," and then, simply, in the hallway, with people moving past them in both directions, "You built that, all of it. Every piece they just spent an hour adjudicating. You built it. I want to say that plainly, in a hallway where there is no agenda attached to saying it." She looked at him. 12 years in this industry. She had been around people who recognized good work and said so, and she had been around many more people who recognized good work and decided who got credit for it based on factors that had nothing to do with the work itself. Marco Reyes had sought her out specifically because of what she had done and not because of who she was standing next to. That was not a small thing. "Thank you," she said. They took the elevator down together and walked out into the October morning, and she breathed the cold, clear air, and she called Dana. "It is done," she said. A pause that contained a great deal. Then, "Come home. I am making the good coffee." She walked the 11 blocks. She needed the sidewalk under her feet and the city around her, the ordinary fact of the world, going about its Friday, entirely unaware of what any particular morning had cost any particular person. She turned her phone off for the walk and let herself just be in it. The October light and the foot traffic and the smell of coffee from a cart on the corner. She thought about her father and thought, "I am walking. I have arrived somewhere. This is better." Chapter 5. Pay what is owed. Sienna found her in the Hunt Global lobby on a Tuesday afternoon, 10 days after the board session. Nadia had gone back to the building for one practical reason: a notarized copy of a secondary filing that Gretchen needed from the corporate records office on the 8th floor. She had been in and out in 20 minutes and was crossing the lobby toward the exit when she heard her name. She stopped and turned. Sienna was coming from the elevator bank, still in her building credentials. She was dressed with the precision she always brought to places where she needed to project authority. And she was walking toward Nadia with the deliberate pace of someone who has decided on something and does not want the corridor to be long enough to change their mind. Nadia stood where she was. The Hunt Global lobby was not empty. Carla was at the reception desk, fully visible. 2 junior assistants were at a station to the left. A small group of visitors was seated near the windows waiting for a meeting host. The morning security officer was at his post near the doors. It was a Tuesday afternoon in the lobby of a functioning company, and there were people in every part of it. Nadia noted all of that, and she stayed exactly where she was, in the center of the lobby, in plain sight of all of it. Sienna stopped a few feet away and said, "I think we should talk, privately. There is a conference room on 3. "I'm fine here," Nadia said. Something shifted slightly in Sienna's expression, not yet visible to the people around them but visible to Nadia, who knew her face. Sienna started with the professional angle. There was a version of this that did not have to be total loss on both sides. Secondary agreements still in play, relationships they had both built that did not need to become collateral damage. A different kind of arrangement could preserve the work that had value regardless of current circumstances. She said these things in the measured register she used in meetings, the voice of competence and reason that Nadia had spent 2 years helping her find. Nadia let her finish. Then Sienna moved to the personal angle. She said she knew how this looked and was not going to pretend otherwise. But Nadia, of all people, understood what it meant to be a woman trying to build something real in rooms that were not built for women. The choices she had made were not simple. They were both women who had fought for what they had. Nadia looked at her. Carla at the desk had stopped what she was doing, not obviously. But her hands were still on the keyboard, and she was not typing. The 2 assistants at the station to the left had the specific quality of people holding very still. "I want to tell you something," Nadia said. Her voice was at normal conversational volume, not raised, not lowered, the volume of someone who has nothing to hide from the room she is standing in, "and I want you to hear all of it." Sienna went quiet. "Diana Flores," Nadia said. "She interviewed for the World Cup project coordinator role 2 years ago. The strongest candidate in the pool by a significant margin. You told HR she was too junior. She was 2 years more experienced than you were at the same stage of your career." She did not pause for reaction. She continued, "Naming things the way you name things when you are reading from a record that exists and cannot be changed. Marcus Bell. He came to you in January with a restructuring concern about the post-closing integration. You reclassified his position 3 weeks later. He left the company in March." A pause. "Julian Park, 8 years of precise, careful work, 3 years on the World Cup build, present in every room, every negotiation, every document. You tried to remove him with a non-disclosure agreement written broadly enough to cover every single thing he had ever witnessed." She stopped. "That is not a woman fighting in a difficult world. That is a woman who decided that the people in her way did not matter enough to consider. And those 3 names are now part of the formal governance review the board opened last week." The lobby was very quiet. The words had not been loud, but they had been specific, and they had been said in a room where people were present, and Sienna knew, from 4 years of learning to read rooms, that specific things said in rooms with witnesses do not disappear. Sienna's composure had not shattered. It had simply stopped being composure and become something else. The expression of someone standing in a lobby where the structure they have been maintaining has been named clearly, out loud, in front of other people, and they can no longer pretend it has not been named. "You opened those doors," she said. It came out thinner than she intended. "I did," Nadia said, "and I want you to sit with what that means. I saw something in you that I recognized for myself, and I gave you everything I could give, every room, every introduction, every piece of knowledge I had spent 10 years building. I gave it to you because I believed it was the right thing to do." She held Sienna's gaze and did not look away. "And you took all of it and used it to take everything I had, my work, my husband, my father's seat." She said it without anger, without heat, with the clarity of someone who has been seeing something accurately for a long time and has nothing left to soften. There is no version of this where we negotiate a resolution. We are done. Completely and permanently done. She picked up her bag. "I hope you find something real to build," she said. "Something that actually belongs to you, because you are not without ability. You never were. That was never the problem." She walked past Sienna to the lobby doors. Carla watched her go. She did not look away, and she did not pretend she had not heard. And the fact that she did not pretend was its own small specific justice that was not nothing. Nadia went out through the doors and kept walking. Reed called 2 days later and asked to meet. Not at the apartment, which was being handled through attorneys. Not at a restaurant, which would have been a performance of some kind. He asked for the small conference room at a midtown hotel, the kind that belongs to business travelers and has meeting space that belongs to no one in particular. She agreed because she understood he was trying to find somewhere that was neither his territory nor hers. She arrived first and poured water for both of them, which she did without thinking, and then noticed and decided not to change. He came in on time. He looked like a man who had not been sleeping quite enough and had stopped managing how that appeared. No jacket, no tie, no version of the composed executive she had watched him be in rooms for 5 years. He was just Reed, which was in a strange way more difficult to look at than all the versions. He sat down and did not have a prepared angle. She could tell immediately he had come without one. That was new. "I have been thinking about something," he said. "The clause in the contract. You wrote it in 9 months before any of this, before you knew." "I wrote it because I had been paying attention," she said. "And because my father taught me that you write the emergency clause before you need it." He looked at the table. "I did not know it was there," he said, "not as a defense. I signed documents you prepared and did not read them, because it never occurred to me that they were yours in the way they were yours. I looked at the work and I saw something that belonged to us. I never stopped to understand that there was a you that existed separately from what I needed you to be." She sat with that. "I know," she said. "That is exactly what it felt like from the inside. Not that you were cruel, that you did not see me, like I was part of the furniture of your life and you assumed I would stay exactly where I was, because furniture does not decide to become something else. When you used my father's story in the Tanaka pitch, that was the moment I understood it completely. You took the most private thing I had ever told you and you put it on a conference table to close a deal. Not because you meant to hurt me, because you had stopped thinking of it as mine." He held what she was saying with the specific attention of someone who has decided the only useful thing left to do is actually hear it. She gave him credit for that. It was the most present she had seen him in years. "I cannot fix what I took," he said. "I know that. I wanted to say it to you directly, without attorneys in the room. That I understand now what I did not understand when I was doing it. I believe you mean it," she said. That matters, even if it does not change anything. He nodded once slowly. Take care of yourself, Reed, she said. She meant it, not warmly, not with anything left of what they had once had between them, but plainly, the way you mean a true thing when there is nothing useful to add to it. She walked out. He did not follow. The following Monday, she arrived at the Meridian offices at 8:15 and found Marco already at his desk, which she had come to understand was simply how he worked, not a performance of diligence, but the habit of someone who preferred to begin things before the day got loud. He was on the phone when she arrived, speaking in Spanish, and he held up one finger. She set her bag down and looked out the window while she waited. The city was doing its Monday morning thing in every direction. He finished the call and set the phone down and said, "My mother. She calls every Monday before I can get settled because she does not trust that I am eating properly. She has called every Monday for 30 years, and she has never once been convinced I am eating properly." He said it with the specific warmth of a man who finds this more comforting than irritating, who has decided that the people who worry about you consistently for 30 years are something to hold on to rather than manage. She still calls from Caracas on the old landline. She refuses to give up. Nadia smiled. A real one. He picked up a document from the corner of his desk and held it out to her. It was the North American Partnership Lead Confirmation. A single-page document from FIFA's Corporate Partnerships Committee confirming the formal transfer of the primary sponsorship relationship to Meridian Sports Group. At the top, under lead architect of partnership, was her name, Nadia Hunt, not co-architect, not the quiet secondary designation she had put into a contract at midnight, because she needed something on the record. Her name in the primary line on the document that would be filed with FIFA's international registry and referenced in every subsequent communication related to the partnership she had built. She stood at the edge of his desk and read it twice. "I thought you should hold it," Marco said. "Not look at it on a screen, hold it." She held it. She thought about 11 drafts of a pitch document. She thought about 4 days on the phone with lawyers in March, working through exclusivity language until she found something that held. She thought about stepping back when the deal closed, the habit of stepping back. The years of practicing invisibility so fluently that she had nearly convinced herself it was the same thing as modesty. She thought about a seat in a stadium that was built as a promise, and the woman who had sat in it, and the man who had handed it away, and the formal breach determination being read into a permanent company record with his full name on it, and no way to unfile it, ever. She thought about her father. "Thank you," she said to Marco. He shook his head. "It was already yours," he said. "I just made sure the paper caught up." She set the document carefully on his desk and went to her own office, which was smaller than her office at Hunt Global, and had a window that faced west instead of north and a coffee machine that was better than the one she had at home, and she sat down at the desk and opened her laptop and began the work she had been building toward for the better part of a year. The window let in the afternoon light at the low angle of October, everything slightly sharper edged in the fall, and outside the glass, the city was going about its Monday the way it always did. Dana had gotten the tickets earlier that week, not a World Cup, not a major tournament with a corporate box and a branded suite, a regular MLS match at the stadium on the west side of the city, the kind where you buy beer in a plastic cup from a cart in the concourse, and the seats are close enough to the field that you can hear the players calling to each other. They arrived early enough to watch warm-ups, which was Dana's preference. She liked seeing teams before they were performing, when they were just working. They had seats midway up the east side with a clean sightline to the center circle. They had cups of something that was technically dark beer and practically a statement of intent about the kind of evening this was. The stadium filled around them, families with kids, a group of men in matching scarves behind them who knew every player's name and were not quiet about it. A couple to Nadia's left, sharing a soft pretzel with the comfortable ease of people who have been sharing things for 20 years and do not think about it anymore. The lights came up full when the teams took the field. The noise a stadium makes in that moment, even a modest stadium at a regular October match, is its own kind of thing. It is not polished. It has no sponsor's name attached to it. It is just people in the same place wanting the same thing at the same time, which is as one of the oldest and simplest things people do together, and which her father had spent 40 years planning to be part of in person. She thought about him in the armchair in Queens, the too strong coffee, the elbows on his knees, the way he called every play under his breath as though the coaches on the field could actually hear him. She thought about the cast iron pots her grandmother carried across an ocean, still on the hook in her kitchen, still on the stove every Sunday, because some things are built to outlast the circumstances that produced them. She thought about a seat in a stadium she had built for a promise, and the woman who sat in it, and the man who handed it away, and the formal determination being read into a permanent record with his full name attached to it and no way to take it back. She was here. The stadium was not Los Angeles, and it was not the World Cup final, and it was not the suite with the champagne and the branded hospitality package. It was a plastic seat in October with a $9 beer, and Dana beside her already leaning forward because one of the midfielders had the ball in interesting territory. She was here and her father was not, and the distance between those two facts was the same distance it had always been and was not going to close. But she was here, in a stadium, at a match, present for it completely, elbows on her knees, not thinking about the boardroom or the transfer or the governance review or the office where her name was now on the primary line of a FIFA filing, not thinking about a charcoal blazer in a lobby, not thinking about a hotel conference room and a man who finally understood something when it was too late to matter. Just thinking about the grass and the light and 60 yards of green field and 60 people around her caring about the same thing at the same time. The midfielder crossed it into the box. The stadium came up around her, all of it at once. The sound filling everything the way sound fills things when there is enough space and enough people and nobody is performing anything. Just real. She rose with them. She thought, I am here. This is for you. This is where I got to. On the walk home, her phone buzzed once in her coat pocket. A text from Marco. It said, "Good work this week. See you Monday." Then, 40 seconds later, a second message. Your father would have liked the stadium better than the suite anyway. More honest. She stood on the sidewalk under the October streetlights and read it twice. Then she put the phone back in her pocket and kept walking. She thought, yes, he would have. The seat she had built was not the seat she ended up in. That was fine. The seat she ended up in was hers, in a way that no one could touch, that no one had given her, and no one could take back. That she had arrived at by walking in the direction her father had always told her to walk when the ground shifted underneath her. It was not the seat she had built for him. It was better. It was a seat that was completely and only hers, earned in full, with her name on the primary line and her grandmother's watch on her wrist, and the city going about its October evening around her, and her friend still walking beside her, and somewhere in Caracas an old landline that a woman would pick up on Monday morning to check that her son was eating properly. It was enough. It was when she let herself feel the full and specific weight of it, standing on a sidewalk in October, with the noise of the stadium still in her chest and the cold air on her face and her father's voice somewhere underneath all of it saying, start walking. More than enough. It was, in fact, exactly where she was supposed to be. It was a start.